Hi, hello, welcome everyone. Thank you for being here on this Monday, 5th of July, 2021. So today we're going to be talking about feminism and migration. So feminism is often overlooked in the topic of migration, and so we're going to try to look at some of the challenges that migrant and refugee and asylum seeker women face and that are often overlooked within feminist circles. So our talk today is going to aim to explore some of these challenges, both from the perspective of origin and destination countries of migration, in addition to analyzing how patriarchal expectations add to the experience of migrant mothers. So today we have here my co-host Ariane.
Hi everyone.
And our guest speaker Adele.
Hi, good evening.
And myself, Vanya. So I'm just going to let Ariane introduce a little bit about herself.
Sure. So yeah, happy to be here. I'm Ariane and my pronouns are she, her. I'm currently based in Berlin. I'm working here, and I don't know if we talk about our studies, but I studied political sciences and did some work on migrant women, wrote some reports for the Council of Europe, so I'm really interested in the subject. And I'm also Afghan and French. I'm second generation migrant, Afghani migrant. So this topic has always been close to home for me. And Vanya, maybe you can introduce yourself. So my co-host for tonight.
Okay, thank you. Yes. So I'm Vanya, originally from the US. It's actually where I am joining in from today as I'm visiting family here in the US. I am first generation US American from mostly Latin American background. And I'm also an immigrant myself because for almost the past decade, I've been living in Europe. So migration is definitely very close to home for me. It's kind of always been part of my life, my identity, and my family's context and identity. And so I will let our guest speaker tell us a little bit more about herself.
Yeah, thank you, Vanya, and thank you for inviting me to speak tonight. So my name's Adele, pronouns she, her as well. I'm currently based in Utrecht, Netherlands, and this is where I'm doing my master's currently in pedagogical sciences. And I guess for me, migration, I'm half British, half French, and grew up in France with a British mother, and this is now the fifth country that I'm living in. So I've moved around quite a lot, but obviously as a white European, I definitely haven't come across some of the challenges that some of the women that I currently work with are confronted with, but I've definitely also gone through some cultural changes along the way, and I'm really excited to talk more about my research and my current internship. So thanks again for inviting me.
Yay, we're really happy to have you here tonight. Adele and we met during an internship we did in an NGO in Berlin at the same time. She's always super passionate about social issues and super active in just this line of work in general. So I'm super happy to have her here tonight.
Great. So maybe we should start out by just asking the question, what exactly constitutes a migrant?
Yeah, I mean, for tonight, our subject is super, super large. I mean, feminism and migration. I think we're not going to touch upon everything, right? But we can at least try to contextualize a little bit the subject. And after that, we'll focus more on the work of Adele and what she does. But yeah, to contextualize, we need good definition. We need to know what we're talking about, right? And we always hear these words: migrants, refugee, asylum-seeking individuals. What does that exactly mean? Because it's used everywhere, and I think it has some connotation. It has been weaponized. So let's just go back, exactly as you said, Vanya, back in the definitions. So according to the International Organization for Migration, a migrant person is a person who is moving or has moved across an international border, regardless of the person, the person's legal status, whether the movement is voluntary or involuntary, what the cause of the movement are, and what the length of his stay abroad is. So it's basically a person that moved abroad of their own willingness because they wanted it. A refugee, on the other hand, the term itself refers to a precise legal definition that comes under international law. It's we can find it in the Article 1 of the 1951 Refugee Convention, and I'm not going to read it, but basically a refugee is we're here to have a conversation about this, so I'm not going to read long, complicated definitions, but a refugee is a person who left their country of nationality for fear of their own safety. That can come in those persecution or fear of being persecuted. It can come from race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social or ethnic group, or a political opinion. And these people are usually stuck outside of their countries of nationality, cannot go back or don't want to go back because of their own safety. And that is what a refugee is. An asylum-seeking person is a person that has applied for the refugee status to an appropriate national authority or to the UNHCR, obviously across borders, outside of their country of nationality. So an asylum-seeking individual should only be an asylum seeker for a precise amount of time. It shouldn't be lifelong status, basically. And so when we think about it, the difference between a migrant person and a refugee is just the reason why they moved. Right.
Okay, thank you for those great definitions.
Yeah. Oh, I wanted to also mention, because we're going to talk about women a lot, and I think we wanna also give the precision that we. In this conversation, at least, we will have an inclusive definition of woman. It's normal, but it's important to mention it, I think. Yeah.
Okay. So, Adele, I know you briefly introduced your thesis.
Yeah.
Maybe you could tell us a little bit more.
Definitely. So my thesis this year was, the topic was decided in parallel with my internship. So I need to speak about one to speak about the other. And initially, my master's looks more at youth issues, but anything to do with youth. So of course that includes parenting as well. And what was interesting is that I initially wanted to work in an organization that was directed at children. And when I came across It's My Child, I really was blown away by the need for more parental initiatives, especially for migrant parents, because these back. And if you look at a child that's migrated in any form, they often are placed in school straight away, and they integrate a lot more easily than their parents. They also learn the language of the country a lot quicker than the parents might do. And so the organization that I'm working at was actually founded by a Palestinian refugee woman who came to the Netherlands 3 years ago. and for want of a better future, and for a better future for her children. And once she arrived, she realized that she wasn't really being listened to, and she felt that her role was very much overlooked as a mother. And by that I mean teachers and community workers were doing the role for her, and she didn't feel like she had a say. She lost her confidence, and she felt very judged for the way that she was educating her children. So that's where my organization comes in. So we work with mostly first generation migrant parents, and it's directed at empowering. So empowerment is the main word. So it's empowering these parents to gain their parental self-efficacy, or to regain their self-efficacy in their parental role post-migration. And it's a parents-led foundation. So we do many different projects, and it's been really eye-opening for me. So yeah, in parallel with that, I am now writing my thesis specifically on how migrant women navigate the changes and challenges that they face post-migration in the Netherlands, and what strategies they use to overcome them. So that's a little bit more background about me.
Yeah, and talk about migrant women. Maybe we can to circle back a little bit. Thanks. I mean, after a little introduction, we can go back later a bit more in detail into those issues. But before we talk about these issues, I think we need to to actually also contextualize what the situation is with migrant women, right? So, I mean, when we talk about migration, we always mention migration as a crisis, and it's always talked about as a new phenomenon if it's in the media in general. But actually, migration has always existed throughout humanity's history, and women in migration have always very often been overlooked. Also, we only have very new, very recent studies that actually now finally include women in their numbers in their research. But we know that all throughout humanity's history, in migration, women were representing half of those migration movements or migrating populations. And it's still the case nowadays. We still have about 48 to 50% of the migrants or the people going through the migration processes that are also women and girls. Something that is new, though, since 2015, 2014, is that before, when women were migrating, they were often migrating with their family or in group. It's very dangerous for women to migrate, to go through the migration process alone. But since 2014 and 2015, we have more and more women and girls that are going through the migration process alone. And that is an interesting change. And often, I mean, as we saw with the definition of migration, refugees, asylum-seeking individuals, refugee people are moving because they have to, because there's an endangerment to their safety. And women that are migrating alone go through the migration process knowing that they are that there's higher risk of violence against them, but it's worth it because the danger of their country of origin or country of start is so high. And the violence that migrant women face, I mean, I'm sure that Adele, when you work with migrant moms, first generation migrant mothers, they have gone through a lot and they have to deal with that too, alongside integrating into the new society and making sure that kids are, they're taking care of their kids, and we will talk about that later also. But we can mention also, yeah, exactly, that women in particular, women in particular go through higher risk of violence because of gender-based violence specific to their gender. Gender is a socially constructed set of expectations and behaviors and activities that women or men, I mean, if we talk about the binary, are supposed to follow, and it puts people at risk in gender violence, gender-based violence, and yeah, and we have many different issues like that. We have through the smuggler networks, women that can be used as bargaining chips for their own migration, their own ability to be able to move, to go through their journey, but also they're used as bargaining chips for their families in general. There's a massive endangerment. I mean, human trafficking is a big danger also, and women and girls that are also male kids, but tonight we're going to talk mostly about women and girls, and they are really at risk and very vulnerable to human trafficking. We have rape, which is just now not normal, but something that happens, and mass rape is at war. It has been used as a weapon, and during the migration processes happens all the time also. And the women that are refugee or asylum seekers don't have access to justice, so there's a lot of violence that they go through, and they have no protection. And then we talk about women. The girls have added vulnerability, obviously, and they have additional risk, like early. I mean, and of course, if you add on sexual orientation, gender orientation, disability, all of those things are just added factors of that can bring violence. For example, one of the biggest issues we have right now is the disappearance of girls through the migration process. So you'll have a certain amount of women and a certain amount of girls that will go from countries of nationality, the first country, they'll get out of the country, and through the migration process, through the journey until the country of arrival, you notice that there's a really low number of girls and women that arrive to those countries compared to the girls and women that have have departed from those countries. And it is an issue that is really overlooked. According to the European Network of Migrant Women, it's something we need to figure out. And with all the other issues I mentioned, human trafficking, rape, everything, we need to take care of that. And then also, once the women arrive, for example, if we talk about Europe, because I think both Adele and I are more specialized about what's happening in Europe, we don't have regulations that are gender, that include gender issues. We don't have regulations and centers and camps that are sensitive to those issues and include those problems and protect women. Most of the time, they're also very vulnerable. There are a lot of issues that go through when they arrived in the country, and this is another topic. We can talk about that for a long time also, but I think it's now talking about the country of arrival, we can maybe talk about what you were mentioning, Adele, and mothers.
Yeah.
Do you also kind of study or work with women who have newly arrived in the country? Do you also see that? And
definitely. I mean, the organization mostly works with first generation migrants and actually very new migrant women as their first point of contact, really, of their first point of support. A lot of these women, they arrive and a lot of them are migrating because, well, they have to, and but some of them also for jobs or their husband's jobs. And this actually leaves a lot of women, home alone in a new country with their kids at school and their husbands working, and they are given very little support to integrate. They don't know where they can go and learn the language, for example. They don't know where they can find certain medical support. There's all of these things that are just, it's like expected of you to know your way around the country. So we definitely see that, yeah.
And do you see, I mean, I guess in your time in the Netherlands, have you seen any sort of growing awareness of this, or some changes that perhaps have been implemented, or at least starting to be?
That's a really good question. And to be honest, I think I see most of it, which is growing, is for children and not so much for adults. So actually the school in which my office is based is a trans school. And this is for newly arrived, say, migrant children who don't speak Dutch, and it's for them to get up to the level in which they could go to a normal Dutch school. So in about a year or two, it's like intensive Dutch lessons or maths, or you know, a lot of these refugee children haven't been in school for 5-6 years, so that they've got to like get up to the level. And I'd never heard of these transitionary schools. Like, I don't think that they exist in France or in the UK. I thought it was just there's one type of school. But so this was really, I was really like pleasantly surprised that these schools exist. And in terms of parents, there definitely are there are organizations that try and facilitate the integration of refugees, of course. But a lot of the time, as I said, they're, you know, NGOs or foundations that are run by volunteers. So my foundation is fully run by volunteers. And there's just not enough investment in this type of support for parents.
Yeah, it's not governmental
No.
governmental institutions most of the time.
No. And they do exist. Like, there's government. I think, you know, there's a new one here in Utrecht called Welcome to Utrecht, and it's this bureau that you can do with different questions about different topics, whether it be health or work or education. But I think they're very much top down, and it's not so much bottom up, where the people, you know, the newly arrived parents feel like they have a say in something. Like my foundation, where it's really the power to the people. And yeah, so we try and take more of that bottom up approach.
That's great. But yeah, as you said, if there are some organizations that are helping, I feel like it's never enough organizations. I mean, you have a huge amount of women. And I guess what you mentioned also, the fact that it's mostly women that are kind of excluded of the society they're like trying to integrate, let's say, or the culture they're trying to integrate, because as you mentioned, often it's men that will have a job, and women will have jobs also, but it's more often in the in care jobs, and there's not a lot of possibilities for learning a language and having access to social like to climb the social ladder and stuff. Yeah,
and on that, actually, I mean, I haven't finished all of my interviews for my thesis, but some of the women I've interviewed did have jobs, so before migration, one of them being a hotel manager, I think, in Guatemala, and you know, arriving in the Netherlands, there were not many possibilities, and she wanted to focus on her children and on their well-being, and to support them. And it very quickly became difficult because, you know, she didn't have the support network that she did back at home, family, friends, and she kind of had to deal with everything herself. And unfortunately, I mean, you see it in a lot of literature and research as well, is that migrant women are often positioned as being like incompetent citizens, and they're also seen as being deficient compared to native mothers. And actually, you see that in the Netherlands. There's one of the biggest migrant groups in the Netherlands is the Moroccan people, and Moroccan mothers, especially in research, they portray themselves as having more of a disciplinary approach to parenting, and in contrast to the Netherlands, where it's very it's a lot more laid back, and it's okay, we want our children to be completely independent, and those parenting practices often clash, in which obviously the migrant group is seen as the not so right one, and this is really difficult for migrant parents, because they're trying to somewhat integrate and someone pick up on some of the codes and norms in the Netherlands, but at the same time they feel very much looked down on, and I think this need to assimilate is not right, and we see that in most European countries. You know,
I mean, it's it's at the end of the day, there's a lot of racism in that, and there's it's very difficult to I mean, it's very difficult to integrate a country, a language, a culture that already looks down on you, and it is also very like. I mean, you see a lot of numbers. You see that a lot of migrants, whatever their social economic class was in the country of origin, the country of nationality, when they arrive somewhere, I mean, migrants and refugees mostly, because obviously migrant depends, but for refugees most of the time, because of the countries where they come from also, they most often cannot attain the social class they had or the profession they had in the country of arrival. Often the studies are not validated, and it's definitely it's I think it's very not confusing, but it makes it very difficult, because you don't have access to information, but you also don't have the means to have access to it that you had in the country of nationality also. But this has also an impact on the kids, right? I mean, you worked on motherhood also, but then the kids will take the role of the translator, the business manager of the home, etc., etc. Can you talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, no, definitely. It has a huge impact on the family as a whole. So even if the children are able to integrate more, or able to make friends quicker in the school environment, a lot of children, as you just pointed out, become the language breakers for their parents. So that's the term that is often used in research, in which, you know, they have to go to medical appointments of their parents for their parents, because their parents don't speak the language sufficiently enough, and it means that children do often then take the role of the parent, if you can call it that, and are often left to their own devices as well. You know, if it's I think there's a lot of migrant parents that are obviously, they're migrating also for better opportunities for themselves and their children. So they might be working a lot more than they used to, and then their children are left kind of to their own devices to look after themselves. So we can see shifting dynamics pre and post migration, definitely in families. But
first generation families.
First generation families. Yeah, and then I mean, there's also this divide then in acculturation. So this is how culturized, meaning how much does someone like imprint the new culture, and often children do this. First generation children do this a lot quicker than their parents. So then there can be clashes in values between children and their parents. But what I'm looking more specifically at in the research is parents, because actually I think what I'm saying right now, it's a lot of maybe more negative aspects for children. But a lot of the time when you're talking about parental roles, this is looked at through the lens of the child's development. So in research, it's mostly around that, and actually there isn't enough. I guess that the voices of parents are not listened to enough, and their own identity as parents, it's really undervalued and under researched. So that's why I think it's really important that we do look at it through the
so the specific issues that parents go through, mothers, new migrant mothers, newly arrived migrant mothers, their specific issues aren't necessarily studied, and what impact does that have then? We don't really understand necessarily then how can we really understand the family dynamics if we only have studied from one lens, so the lens of the child, what happens? I mean, we mentioned earlier, a lot of migrants come to a country, and not everyone has a traumatic experience during the migration process, but a very high amount of people do, and only studying the trauma of the children, whilst the trauma of the parents. As you were mentioning, the mothers you were working with often don't have access to institution information. I imagine they don't have access to therapy either. So this is just a question, like how, if we don't study the parents who are the ones that are taking care of the children, even though the children can take a parental role in some things, like how can we understand really what's happening?
Yeah, I think that's it's a really good point, and that's why I was really looking for as much research as I could on this specific point, because I think migrant mothers, they're really overburdened by this need to compromise between their own values and their own cultural practices, and then the ones that are deemed as valuable or exactly, the highly deemed in the country of migration. So I think those voices need to be heard, definitely. And
it's also going back to patriarchal pressure and issues. I imagine, like what you were mentioning earlier, how mothers' practices will be judged upon depending on if they are native Dutch women or not. We've only talked about, I mean, obviously we want to talk about women today, but we've only talked about mothers. Really, like the pressure is upon them, but at the same and what have you experienced in that matter with the parents, with the other partner, the dads usually? Is there a pressure to maybe not try to work as fast as possible, integrate the society as fast as possible? Maybe it's also completely overlooked in research, the parental role of dad.
For the dads, you mean? For the fathers?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's even less looked at, definitely. The impact of migration on fatherhood and on their practices. But what I can say from having many discussions is, and I don't want to, look down on any of these dads at all, but you still find that today when I'm having conversations with fathers about their children and their education and school. They know so little about their children's experiences.
I feel like that's something very common with dads in general. It's unexpected of them to. It's the norm. Yeah,
definitely. Mm-hmm. So the mother kind of looks after anything to do with school, and the little interest, definitely, as you say. There's not that that expectation to deal with that, and I think a lot of them, the ones that I've met anyway, it's still this definitely like the very patriarchal gender role. The dad, goes and gets the money, and the woman looks after the kids. But that's it's still there, definitely.
But a lot of migrant women also have to work.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Can you maybe talk about the dynamic then in that very patriarchal society we are in, and the expectation upon women and mothers, if they still need to work, how is the pressure on them to try and basically do everything?
Yeah,
I mean, talk about that, develop a little bit.
it's a huge pressure. I think that's taking on like 3 different roles at once. And if you look at child rearing in itself, that's already it's a full-time job. So as you just said, I think they are expected to just do so many things at once. And that, I mean, specifically the women I work with, actually a lot of them have been looking for jobs and have failed to find some, or just not found what they wanted. And this means actually that all of these women are then giving back to society in a way through volunteering with IMC, with It's My Child, full time. And it's a volunteer basis. I'm always just completely astounded by the amount of work that these women are putting into the organization to try and help all of any other newly arrived migrant parent. And it's incredible how they find the time to also put the hours into something that they really believe in.
Can you maybe give more precision about, so you mentioned empowerment of parents, of migrant parents. Can you maybe talk a bit more about the processes, the work you guys do in the NGO, the methodology or the practices you might have? Can you give us more detail about that?
Yeah. So as I just said, the whole core of the organization is around empowerment, but this is very much through discussion and through talking, so one-on-one. So when a newly arrived migrant parent arrives in the Netherlands, they can come to the school and they usually meet one of the ambassadors from our organization. And the ambassador really tries to stress what the needs of the parents are. And instead of giving all the answers, like, as we said, a bureau for newly migrant arrived parents might do by giving, okay, go to this, go to that, this will help you for this will help you for that. The organization, it's really like, what are your needs, and how can you how do you want to figure it out? How are you going to find your way? And so through doing that is actually getting these parents to think, okay, what do I need? So to do this, I'm going to have to call this person. And it's really so that they're able to take action themselves. So that's what I mean by empowerment. And then I guess the mission of the organization is really for them to regain their sense of control over their lives. And can you still hear me? I just got a little. Okay.
Yeah,
we can still hear you.
Okay.
So that was really interesting, Adele. Like, thank you so much for all that information. I just wanted to backtrack a little because I felt like when you were describing some of the roles that the children take on as kind of like more like language breakers and different kinds of like parenting type of roles in the new environment in which it's easier for them to assimilate and adapt. I just wanted to say that like it felt like you were describing my childhood to a T. So yeah, I can definitely identify, relate, and vouch for a lot of the things you were saying as a first-generation child. Definitely language breaker, being the translator, interpreter, communicator, problem solver is huge, and it's something that I don't think you necessarily realize until like many years later, of how much agency perhaps these first-generation children take on unconsciously. And then it's kind of something you look back later and you realize, wow, I really had a lot of control there, and I don't know that was necessarily a good thing.
No, that's the thing. I think you can see both sides. I mean, I've chatted with Ariane about it as well, and I mean, I think that's so much to expect from any child. It's huge, and I think in the long term you definitely learn from it, but it might make those relations
Very
tiresome.
complicated, yeah. I think a lot of, as you said, Vanya, very well, it must resonate for a lot of people. A lot of people must resonate with this story. I mean, I've also experienced that, but as you say, it's something like you basically notice when you sacrifice a part of your childhood when you're responsible for these things. But then at the same time, as Adele said earlier, parents don't have access to the appropriate institutions or appropriate organizations that can help them most of the time when it comes to language or just anything else. I mean, if I can give a personal anecdote here, so as I mentioned, my parents came from Afghanistan, and for example, talking about women losing their jobs in their country of nationality, and then when they arrive here, not having the possibility to go back to that job or have their studies recognized. My mother was studying medicine in Afghanistan when she left the country because of the war. She arrived in Europe, so in France, in the 90s, and was basically unable to continue her studies because it wasn't recognized. But she didn't have access to any education because she didn't finish her baccalaureate, so which would be the A levels, the end of your high school diploma, which she had one in Afghanistan, but she couldn't bring it with her in at the time from there, because in the 90s we didn't have smartphones that held thousands of documents and photos and everything. And when you were living in such places, because of your safety, most of the time you don't necessarily, you only have the clothes that are on your back, right? And so it took us years to be able to find a way for my mother to start studying again. And she started less than 5 years ago because her children were old enough to be able to research how an adult in France can have access to university and have access to the last years of high school, to be able to finish a high school diploma and then have access to university. And yes, that's a big pressure on kids, but then the parents that are willing to do the work, unfortunately, often are backed to a wall because they don't have the possibility, anything.
Yeah. I think this goes well with this idea of parental self-efficacy that I also look at in my thesis, and that's the loss of self-efficacy, so the loss of confidence in your own ability to parent or to all of this. I think that, I mean, yeah, it's like hitting a brick wall. I think your confidence is just, it's like backtracking, a million steps, and that can leave parents feeling really just unable to do anything, or not knowing where to start in that new country, and it can be really difficult. And I think that's why the supports and often these networks, so just to finish off my thesis, we'll then look at the strategies that are used by migrant mothers, and a lot of the time that's by really making the most of those social networks and those communities of similar women or parents that are going through the same as them, or very similar experiences. Because as you said, Ariane, I think there's some difficulty sometimes when you're used to having very different support in your country of origin, and you're used to more collectivistic, I think that's like collectivist values in parenting. So having the family, I know that in so many cultures it's completely normal for the grandma to look after the child as much as the mother does, or the aunt, or the friends. And arriving somewhere like the Netherlands, where it's super individualistic, so it's the parents that are going to look after the children and bring them to daycare or something. And I mean, daycare is another issue. It's not affordable at all. So it then becomes really, really difficult. And that's why I think these organizations of support for parents are really crucial and key for these parents.
Absolutely. And also you mentioned that a lot of cultures or can be collectivist, and then in the Netherlands or in Western Europe in general, it can be quite individualistic. But even in an individualistic culture, you still have a network. You still grew up in a city. You still have friends. You still have grandmas are still there. There's still uncle. Even if the responsibility itself is just on the parent and not on the whole family, you do. As a refugee or as a migrant newly arrived in the country, you're just completely isolated.
Completely.
No family ties, no friend groups, nothing. And that is also something I think people forget a lot, because we do often do the comparison between collectivist cultures and societies and more individualistic societies, but it's just another extreme what migrant parents go through. Yes,
there's so many layers.
It's not, it's a sort of, it's completely isolating just because they're alone, but then you don't understand the language, so it's like the further barrier to for anything.
And I think, if I may, like as my own personal experience as an immigrant, I feel like nowadays, especially within the English-speaking world, just immigrants who have a decent level of English, and combining that with the magic of social media and like communities that are so prevalent and so easy to build, like digitally, it's amazing how much of a resource that really is nowadays, and how absent I can imagine that was, how much of a void perhaps there existed in this regard, not that long ago, where really like you couldn't so easily tap into a sort of semi-already formed community, like where you just happen to move, So I've found that, especially in places where I've lived where I don't necessarily dominate or handle very well the local language, that I've been able to reap a lot of resources from these digital communities that are available today. So that's a huge game changer for immigrants nowadays.
Yeah, definitely. I see that in my organization as well, because actually a lot of there's a huge amount of Syrian mothers that we work with, and actually a lot of these mothers speak neither Dutch, neither like English nor English. So a lot of them are speaking Arabic, and what's great is that we now have ambassadors that talk to a lot of these women, and they're able to communicate, because otherwise it would be almost impossible. It would be really, really hard. So the language thing is a huge one, and English will always be an advantage, definitely.
Mm-hmm. So perhaps maybe we should talk about maybe some of the strategies or policies that perhaps need to be looked at, like in a more thorough manner, to address some of these issues. I don't know. Adele, you seem probably more the expert here.
I mean, in terms of policies, as we just said, I think just additional funding, that is the ground of it is needed for more support networks. But I think an interesting one as well is whether these initiatives, like the one I've been volunteering with, is enough actually for parents to feel integrated and accepted, but also valued within society. And what you see is that a lot of these organizations, they very much value bonding social capital instead of bridging social capital. And by that I mean bonding social capital is very much finding people that within your community, and bridging social capital is usually used in order to bridge the gap between two different groups. And the problem is right now that all of the parents I work with, yes, they have now their community and they feel heard, but then within the Dutch communities, I don't know how well they feel there, how confident or accepted they feel. So I think initiatives that really bring, you know, locals with newcomers is the way to go about it, in my opinion.
Yeah, for sure. Unfortunately, in my country of origin right now, that sort of attitude is not, I guess it's not the trending sort of attitude right now, at least through the last couple of years, but it makes a huge difference.
Yeah,
Just the
I'm very much
top-down
talking.
attitude, so.
Yeah, I'm very much talking from a quite a utopian perspective, because definitely in the current state of affairs and the current, you know, political systems we live in, yeah, there's going to be a lot of backlash for this kind of.
Yeah, and a lot of those attitudes kind of come from, they're very much percolate top down.
Yeah.
And, you know, unfortunately, whoever's on top kind of has the national podium there in terms of guiding people's attitudes towards migrants, and you know, how open people then end up being in regards to embracing the other and things, you know, things that are different. So, yeah. Ariane, I think you wanted to say something, or?
No, I just basically wanted to piggyback on what you said, and just with the rise of the extreme right in Europe and the US in general, and Islamophobia, and exactly the vision that the other is dangerous, when actually, and again, going back to one of the first things that I think I had mentioned, is that migration is not new. The other has always, like, it's just so silly when you think about it, how it's always just repeating itself. And and it's just, when we talk about migration in general, and especially in Europe and in the US and in the more developed countries, we always talk about the rush of a wave of migrants, the migration crisis. And as I said, it's not a crisis because it's always been there, migration. It just moves and changes, of course, with history and geopolitical situations. But we always hear this narrative, especially here, where in the countries where we are, so in the Netherlands, in the US, Germany, France, all of these countries, we always hear the narrative of there's too many immigrants, and that's the biggest fear. That's the biggest fear, isn't it? But the vast majority of immigrants in the world stay in developed countries, as we call them. According to the UNHCR, for example, in 2018, 85% of migrants, so I'm talking about like refugees, asylum seekers, just people moving across borders, 85% of those migrants stay in developed countries and don't come to Europe or to the US or the countries that are apparently targeted by the big wave. And I think that's very important to keep in mind, how small the migrant populations still are, and in the countries we currently are talking about and we currently are in, and how, when we talk about inclusivity, about investing in funds and policy changing, it's always, the reaction is always as if it was such a huge thing to ask, it's going to cost so much money, etc. But in the end, the target population that would have this help to integration is a very small fraction of the populations on the Netherlands, of the countries like France, Germany, and I think that's something to keep in mind also.
Yeah, and also, you know, we always see this this type of migrant blame, like finger pointing. We always see it most during times of economic crises, and you know, during when anything goes wrong, really, instead of looking at the policies that are really creating the problems. I mean, right now, you know, I'm in the US right now. I've been visiting my family for a bit, and it's kind of ironic to see how there is actually right now a huge shortage in businesses being able to staff their like low-skilled type of positions, you know, like the typical people that work in restaurants and in the kitchens of restaurants, or more types of construction roles or domestic work. And you know, these are basically roles that only immigrants take, and you know, there's a huge lack right now of available people, and people, you know, these business owners are complaining, and it's just quite ironic, but
just to clarify again, for those who weren't here before, Vanya is talking about the US, right?
yes,
So,
yeah. I don't know if I mentioned that before, but yeah, I'm talking about the US.
Yeah. No, I think, I mean, leading on from all of that, it's so easy to cast someone as an outsider and as an other for any different, you know, difference or background, origin, religion as well. Like even with the women I work with, I mean, this is an incredibly diverse network of women. And I know, you know, one of them, for example, she told me one day, she's from Eastern Europe, that she'd never spoken to a woman wearing a hijab. And I was like, oh, okay. And for her, this was, I mean, it just never really happened, was never in conversation. And I mean, they're now, you know, incredibly good friends in the network. And it's just really, realizing that that everyone, you know, regardless of religion or culture and ethnicity, like they're all going through the same challenges a lot of the time and difficulties, and it's just beautiful to see when those bridges when there's bridges between these people, and conversations had that really it's just really important to have those conversations, I think, that you're not used to, or with people that you're not used to being with in certain social circles.
Absolutely. Forget the other and try to understand and get linked to people that we don't have we don't have a lot to do with initially. Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Adele, for your time. Sorry, Vanya, you wanted to say something.
No, I was just going to say the same thing. Yeah, thank you so much. It's been a really interesting conversation here at Pink Talks by Young Educators, and we were thrilled to have you, Adele. Like, you really brought a lot of insight to migration and how feminism interplays in this phenomenon and is often overlooked.
Thank you so much. Thanks for inviting me.
Such a pleasure to have you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.